So in today's video, it's kind of a request. Someone asked in one of the comment sections below, how do I prepare and do the milling of the ends of my pen blanks? And I actually use two different techniques depending on the blank, and we're going to get into that one. So today I'm going to do a really quick video. I'm going to talk about the differences between the way that I prepare the blanks, both using a sanding center and then the traditional end mills, why I do it that way, and once again, this is always just the way that I do things. So I always encourage people to contribute in the comments if there's a different way of doing it. So with that, let's get right into the video. So as I said earlier, I use one of two different techniques. I either use the standard pen mill, or I'm going to use my sanding center using this V block. And we're going to get to that in a minute, which one that I choose to use and why I choose to use it. But first, let's take a look at just a little bit of, I'd say it's common sense. So when I'm going to mill something, and I've got this piece that I'm going to mill, it's alumilite, and you can see here I've got probably more than 1/4 of an inch, maybe even 3/8 of an inch of material still sitting on here. And rather than take, even if I'm going to use the traditional pen mill in here, rather than take the pen mill and try to turn this and turn all that away, I'm going to go to my bandsaw or whatever I've used before, and I'm going to cut that down. And the reason that I'm going to do that is because we've talked before on other things is, why do my tubes become unglued? And one of the reasons that tubes become unglued, we talked about earlier, is because of heat. And if I take this pen mill and I just jam it in there and it spins, and it's going to go all the way down to that 1/4 of an inch that it's got to take out of here, it's going to build up tons of heat. And when you pull it out, you can kind of touch it. Well, that heat gets transferred onto the brass tube. That brass tube then transfers the heat into the glue, and the glue softens up. So whether I'm using the sanding center or the pen mill, the first thing I'm going to tell you is to trim it down so that you've got, this is a little bit big here, but maybe at best a 1/16 of an inch is that all you're going to be taking off. So now let's take a look at why I use the pen mill and when I use the V block. So the pen mills are a great device. I love the device. And anytime I'm going to use any kind of solid material, like as you see here, this is alumilite, this is wood, I'm going to use the pen mill. And the advantage of the pen mill is that you get this really nice 90-degree angle on here. So it's real easy and it's super simple to get that nice clean cut. You're simply gonna mount this. In my case, I mount it in my drill press, and then when I put this in, it's gonna turn it down, and I'm gonna get it right to the brass tube. I've got a clamp that I can use to hold this, or any kind of holder that I want, and I'm just gonna get it down to the brass tube. When I pull it out, that's always gonna be at a perfect 90 degrees. So these pen mills are great for doing something like that. I think one of the things that I see people do too is that they always start with this 7mm pen mill, and then they sell these things. These things are called spacers. And so what this does is this can convert my 7mm into a 10.5mm. So you can see here now, this is my 7mm, but there's no play in here because I've decided, or I'm using this spacer that's sitting in there. And they sell these spacers for every single different size tube that we're using. So this is a 10.5, we've got 12.5s, we've got all the different kind of spacers that you have out of it. There's a simple trick though. You don't need to go out and buy yourself all these different spacers. Remember, this is a 7mm tube, right? So a 7mm mill. So a 7mm tube fits right on there. So if I take any 7mm tube that I have and I glue a piece of wood on here, and I glue it on this way, now I can take it to my lathe and I can use 7mm bushings just to hold it in spot, but I'm going to turn it down so that the outside diameter here is 10.5. And then that way I don't have to buy a spacer. I've made a spacer. And so I always tell people, all your mistakes, throw them in a bucket somewhere because you're going to wind up using them at some point. So if you've got old 7mm pens that you crack the top on, but the bottom still has the tube sitting in there, take it out, turn it down so that the outside diameter matches here, the diameter that you have here, using your calipers or whatever you want to use, and now you've got the perfect spacer so that you don't have to go out and buy these spacers for all the different kind of pen blanks that you're using on here. So with that, we're going to now move on to why we use the sanding center and how I use the sanding center. So as I said, I use the sanding center when I'm going to do anything like this. This is a label cast. The opals that are here. I love the candy bar wrapper. So you can see this is a candy bar wrapper that's been turned down. And this is probably the most delicate of them all. I can tell you that if the pen mill was to catch this, it would tear it in a heartbeat and turn it. So that's why I don't want to use the traditional pen mills on anything like this. I'm going to use the sanding center. And it's real simple. I've got my Harbor Freight set of punches. And I'm simply going to find the punch that I know fits into the tube. And you can see here this one's got no space. Now let's take one that hasn't been turned yet, so it's a little bit more obvious of what I'm doing. I'm going to take it and I'm going to put it into here. And you can see that there's no space in here. And I'm simply going to use this thing. This thing's called a V-block. And I love this thing. You can see here, it's a nice V-block. And what it does is you'll just take this, lock this down, leave yourself a little bit of a play in there, and put this on. And as you can see, you want to sneak up as close to that edge as possible. So one of the questions you're going to ask is, wow, Mark, that looks like it's really, really shiny, and most punches don't come really, really shiny. Well, I'm going to tell you that a mistake that I make, that you're going to make at some point, we all make this mistake when we use this V-block. So when I put this on here, like now, and I go in and I put it on my my sanding center, and I push in and I sand that off, if I simply was to take this over here and move it down here, now this piece is going to be further out because I've lost anything that I've trimmed off on this edge. So now when it comes out, if this was perfectly lined up with the brass tube on this side, then when I move it over to this side, it's going to be out further. Or actually it's going to be out farther because it's a distance. It's going to be out farther, and so what it's going to do is you're going to hit this. So always make sure every time you rotate it around, you're going to sit here, you're going to twist it off, and you're going to make sure that it completely works. And now I'm going to take you over to the sanding center. I'm going to set this one up and we're going to buzz it through. But after that, we're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit about one technique. So with that, let's go over to the sanding center. So you can see here, here's my standard setup for my sanding center. I've got the round disc. This is an adhesive disc that's put on here. I've got my miter gauge. I make sure that this is square to the table that I have here. And now it's simply my V-block and the piece that I want to actually sand down. And you can see, once again, as I said, I made sure that this is just slightly shy of where it's going to go in. And all I'm going to do is simply turn on my sanding center. I'm going to hold this pretty tight to my miter gauge. I'm always going to be on the left side of center. Same thing as when I'm on my lathe. I'm going to be doing my cutting on the left side of center. And then I'm slowly going to just urge this up and kiss it in. And if you listen real close, you'll be able to hear exactly when we hit the brass tube, and you can stop out. So I don't know if you heard when I hit the brass tube, but now I've got a really nice clean cut on this thing. And then if I was to move it in, as I said earlier, notice that my punch is a little bit proud. So now I would just have to move it down. And you're going to see on this side, I'm really only going to have to kiss it because you can almost see the brass tube is protruding already. It's just a little dull. I heard it make contact, and there you go. So that's really all I'm going to do with this one. That's how I finish it. Anything where I've got any kind of piece on there that's attached to the brass tube that's embedded in the acrylic, I'm going to always want to use this setup. And this is my preferred setup for doing it. And as I said, these V-blocks can take a very big punch, so it can go all the way up into your Majestic set. I like to use, there's two different size V-blocks out there. There's the taller one, this is the smaller one. I feel the smaller one gives me a little bit more control over where I'm doing this and how I'm pushing stuff in. So I like to use the smaller V-block. So now I want to talk about that technique that I mentioned, and it's really about when do you want to do the facing off on these things. As I said, when you're doing the wood and I'm using the mill, I don't really have a big problem. I'm going to be able to take the mill and I'm going to be able to cut off a lot of the stuff with the mill. But on something like this where it's a slightly more delicate, I don't know that I want to actually go to the sanding center and I want to tear off all this all at one time. What I want to do is, and I've seen other people do this one and I love this technique, is I'm going to take my bushings in here. I'm going to put my bushings in here, even though that I've got a little bit of slop still on the end, on both ends, and I'm going to go and I'm going to rough turn this down so that it's only down to about, let's say, 1/8 of an inch of wherever my finished product is. Then if I move it over to the sanding center and I put it in here and I finish turning it off, I finish sanding it with that, now I'm only turning down a very, very little bit, and so I don't have to really, you're really just going to kiss the sandpaper, so I don't have to worry if there is any excess play in here or any kind of wobble in here. I'm not going to worry about it because I'm only kissing that little bit of end off here. I'm not trying to plow off all this. And so if you think about it, all this surface area, when it's attaching to the sanding center is wanting to turn it. It's wanting to pull it out of your hands. So the smaller surface area that I can get on here, the better that I'm going to be, and I'm not going to have as much play in this thing as I'm actually going through, and I'm doing that. So with that, I think we end everything, and I think that covers both different topics that I wanted to give you. So with that ends this session. And as I said earlier, this is just the way that I do it. There's a lot of different ways, and I encourage you in the comments down below to give your way if you've got something better or just want to facilitate conversation. As always, I ask if you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. I'm always looking for more topics, so if you've got some sort of topic that you want to look at, I basically look at social media, I look at things that are going on out there, and that's how I determine what I want to work on. And so I'm always looking to do different kind of things. So with that, as always, thank you for watching and have a great day. This video made possible by the fine folks at Exotic Blanks. For all your pen making needs, Exotic Blanks has you covered. Find them at www.exoticblanks.com. And also by Pen Makers International, the educational source for pen making.